Scratchy bitch. Oh. Ooh, scratchy bitch.
Get out of my way.
Ooh, scratchy bitch. Oh. Scratchy bitch. Scratchy bitch. Oh. Ooh, scratchy bitch. Oh. Ooh, scratchy bitch. Ooh, scratchy bitch. Scratchy bitch. Oh. Oh.
Get out of my
Scratchy
way.
bitch. Scratchy bitch. Scratchy bitch. Ouch. Oh. Ouch.
Get out of my
Scratchy
way.
bitch. Oh. Scratchy bitch. Oh. Oh. Ouch. Oh. Oh.
Get out of my
Scratchy
way.
bitch. Scratchy bitch.
Get out of my
Scratchy
way.
bitch. I'm gonna knock you silly. Ouch. Ouch. I'm gonna knock you silly.
Get out of my way. Get out of my way.
I'm gonna knock you silly. I'll knock you silly.
Get out of my way.
I'll knock you silly. I'll knock you silly.
Get out of my way.
I'll knock you silly. I'll knock you silly.
Get out of my way. Get out of my way. Get out of my way. Get out of my way.
I'll knock you silly. I'll knock you silly.
Get out of my way.
I'll knock you silly.
Get out of my way. Get out of my way.
I'll knock you silly.
Get out of my way.
I'll knock you silly. I'll knock you silly.
Get out of my way. Get out of my way. Get out of my way. Get out of my way.
Knock you silly.
Get out of my way.
I'm gonna knock you silly.
Get out of my way.
I'm gonna knock you silly.
Get out of my way. Get out of my way.
I'm gonna knock you silly. I'm gonna knock you silly.
Get out of my way. Get out of my way.
knock you silly. I'm gonna knock you silly. I'm gonna knock you silly.
Get out of my way. Get out of my way. Get out of my way.
Knock you silly.
Get out of my way.
I'm gonna knock you silly.
Get out of my way.
I'm gonna knock you silly.
Get out of my way. 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 Get out of my way.
I'm gonna knock you silly.
Get out of my way.
I'm gonna knock you silly. I'm gonna knock you silly. I'm gonna knock you silly.
Get out of my way. Get out of my way. Get out of my way.
Knock you silly. Knock you
Get out of my way. Get out
knock you silly.
Get out of my way.
I'm gonna knock you silly. I'm gonna knock you silly.
Get out of my way. 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 Get out of my way.
knock you silly.
Get out of my way. 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 Get out of my way.
Gonna knock you silly.
Get out of my way. Get out of my way. Get out of my way.
I'm gonna knock you silly.
Get out of my way. Get out of my way. Get out of my way.
I'm gonna knock you silly. Oh, ooh, scratchy bitch. Ooh, scratchy bitch. Oh. Ooh, scratchy bitch. Ooh, scratchy bitch. Oh. Ooh, scratchy bitch. Ooh, scratchy bitch. Oh. Oh. Ooh, scratchy bitch. Oh. Oh. Ooh, scratchy bitch. Oh. 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 Scratchy bitch. Oh.
Get out of my way.
I'm gonna knock you.
Get out of my way.
I'm gonna knock you silly. I'm gonna knock you silly. I'm gonna knock you silly.
Get out of my way.
I'm gonna knock you silly.
Get out of my way.
I'm gonna knock you silly. I'm gonna knock you silly. I'm gonna knock you silly. I'm gonna knock you silly.
Get out of my way.
I'm gonna knock you silly.
Get out of my way.
I'm gonna knock you silly. I'm gonna knock you silly.
Get out of my way.
You are my...
Get out of my way. Get out of my way. Get out of my way.
I'm gonna knock you silly.
Get out of my way. 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 Get out of my way.
I'm gonna knock you silly.
Get out of my way. Get out of my way.
I'm gonna knock you silly.
Get out of my way. Get out of my way. Get out of my way. Get out of my way.
I'm gonna knock you silly.
Get out of my way. Get out of my way.
Knock you silly.
Get out of my way. Get out of my way.
I'm gonna knock you silly.
Get out of my way.
Knock you silly.
Get out of my way. Get out of my way.
Knock you silly. 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 Knock you silly.
Get out of my way.
Do you know anything?
Ah!
I'm gonna knock you silly.
Get out of my way.
I'm gonna knock you silly.
Get out of my way.
I'm gonna knock you silly.
Get out of my way.
I'm gonna knock you silly.
Get out of my way.
We don't. I'm gonna knock you silly.
Get out of my way. 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 Get out of my way.
I'm gonna knock you silly.
Get out of my way. Get out of my way. Get out of my way.
Ah, my head.
Oh. Oh. Get out of my
Scratchy
way.
bitch. Scratchy bitch.
Oh. Oh. Get out of my way. Oh. Oh. Get out of my way. Get out of my way. Get out of my way. Quickly, come with me. Get out of my way.
I'm gonna knock you silly.
Get out of my way.
I'm gonna knock you silly. I'm gonna knock you silly. I'm gonna knock you silly.
Get out of my way. Get out of my way. Get out of my way.
I'm gonna knock you silly. Oh. I'm gonna knock you silly.
Get out of my way.
I'm gonna knock you silly.
Get out.
I'm gonna knock you silly.
Get out of my way. 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 Get out of my way.
I'm gonna knock you silly.
Get out of my way. 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 Get out of my way.
Knock you silly. Knock you silly. I'm gonna knock you silly.
Get out of my way. Get out of my way. Get out of my way.
I'm gonna knock you silly.
Get out of my way. Get out of my way.
Mike.
Get out of my way. Get out of my way. Get out of my way.
I'm gonna knock you silly. I'm gonna knock you silly. I'm gonna knock you silly.
Get out of my way. 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 Get out of my way.
I'm gonna knock you silly.
Get out of my way.
Knock you silly.
Get out of my way. 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 Yeah. Get out of my way. Yeah.
I'm gonna knock you silly.
Yeah. Yeah. Get out of my way. Yeah. Get out of my way.
Knock you silly. Knock you silly.
Get out of my way. Yeah. Get out of my way. Get out of my way. Get out of my way.
Oh.